So we now need to consider the instrumentation of our simulated tooth, and most particularly the instrumentation of the second mesiobuccal canal. An endodontic access cavity has been created, and this has been artificially flared here to the mesial so that you are actually able to see into the floor of the pulp chamber, and we identify with our DG16 probe our MB1 canal. And then we look for a line, of course, running from the MB1 towards the palatal, which is here. And the literature would tell us that the MB2 is located along this line, and it should be around 2 millimeters back based on the literature. But for me, it's just a question of scouting along this line as opposed to looking for a particular point, because the canal can have a very different configuration depending on the anatomy involved. We work our way back here, and you can see there's a catching point in our MB2, and you can see the action of the probe as it gets stuck, and we just pull it back out. And at this point we can identify where that MB2 orifice is. So as before with our glass block, we flood the cavity with some irrigant in order to actually ensure that we have lubrication for our file. And actually, interestingly, often the canal becomes a little bit more visible when you do that. From that point, we need to again create a glide path. Now I find it quite useful to actually put the initial files in on a tweezers. So I clip my size 10, I clip it by the handle in a tweezers, and that then allows me to visualize a little bit better and to introduce my size 10 file into the orifice first. I don't do any pushing or anything. And at that point you can then remove your tweezers from the file, and you can start to slowly negotiate your way down towards the coronal portion of this MB2. Now remember, this canal can follow quite a tortuous course, so we've got to be very, very careful, and we're watch winding and pulling and watch winding and pulling without apical pressure. And once we get a bit of freedom of the file, we really we start to file in that motion in order to create a glide path in the coronal portion of the root, because otherwise we will just have a file that is binding in there, and it's not necessarily going to create a glide path for us. So again, we can re-irrigate, and we can introduce our file back into that canal, and it goes in a little bit easier, and we do a lot of filing, and that of course is going to create debris. Now I always scout these canals with a 21mm size 10, because in most cases that is shorter than the full working length of such a canal, and so we can safely introduce our size 10 21mm even down to its stopper and know that we're not out through the apex of the tooth. So we again take our file out, and of course at this point we irrigate copiously again. And we don't spray air into the cavity, because obviously in a natural tooth we're worried about the problems that may cause. But for the purposes of this exercise, in order for you to be able to visualize it, I will spray a little air just so we can see the floor of the pulp chamber a little bit better. So we get rid of our excess irrigant, and we look back in, and at this point we have got adequate flare, I think, to introduce our first nickel titanium instrument, whatever that may be. And we will only essentially introduce this into the point of resistance. And this canal obviously is more difficult than doing a less calcified or less tortuous canal. So we introduce our file in, and we brush on the outstroke. We introduce our file in, and we brush on the outstroke. In it goes in 3 passes, and a lot of brushing towards that mesial interference. And you can see the debris that has now created, and more importantly, you can start to visualize where this actual root canal orifice is a little bit better. We go in with our irrigant, and we get rid of all of that debris, and we look down, and we can see that we've got a canal opening. Now at this point you will switch to possibly a 25mm size 10. It depends on the degree of difficulty of the canal. We have estimated the length in this root to be 21mm. So if you feel that your size 10 21mm file is quite loose, I would at this point clip my apex locator, and I would establish a length. Once we establish a length, we now switch to our 25mm size 10 hand file, measured at 21mm. And we are going to introduce that in, confirm that we can get to length, and also establish patency at 21.5 mils. And so you can see the action. This file is quite rigid, it's quite stuck in the apical portion, so we have got a little bit of work to do. Don't rush this. You don't have to establish patency. You can do it in a number of passes. We can go back in with our rotary file, make sure it's cleaned in the sponge, and we can then work our way down into this apical portion of the root canal system. So again, we go in and we're going down a little bit further. We're always brushing on the outstroke, and we are going in 3 or 4 passes before we stop, and we re-irrigate to get rid of all this debris. A little spray of air again, just for us to visualize this a little bit better. And we will see that we are now establishing a more defined coronal shape associated with the second mesiobuccal canal. At this point, we have measured our instruments to a definitive length of 21 millimeters, and we are now going to introduce this file in, and we are going to let it go to full working length. So again, in a few passes, brushing on the outstroke, brushing on the outstroke, and at that point we are happy that our first instrument has gone to length, and we can then reintroduce our irrigation needle in order to remove the dentinal debris that will create. So we go in there and we clear that out. We of course always re-establish patency, which we have, and we irrigate again, and I can't stress the importance of these steps enough, both biologically and technically. From that point we will go to our finishing file, or if we are doing a single file reciprocating system, our finishing file will have been carried out at that first instrument. But now we go back in and again we introduce it down in this canal. We aren't going to do it in one pass because again it's quite a tortuous anatomy that's there. So we go in, we re-irrigate, and we re-establish patency, we irrigate again, and we finally introduce in our finishing file, and we put that down to our full working length. And that should go down in one more pass, and you'll feel the instrument engaging and you'll hear it clicking, but that's fine. It's just doing the work that we expect it to do. We of course irrigate, and we don't ignore the step of establishing our apical patency again, and we irrigate again. And so you can see we've done that numerous times. And just as an illustration in terms of where we end up, we'll spray some air just to see what the floor of this pulp chamber looks like, and importantly what this prepared second mesiobuccal canal looks like. And you can see it in relation to the MB1. You can see the nice coronal shape that's been created. And so now at this point we are ready to dry and obturate.